this session. What a beautiful day to kick off International Innovation Day. I want to give kudos to Lucas. Without you, this would not happen. And of course, our partner, Elia, where's Elia? Who's from Funded House, just hosted the Global Investor Brunch. So, of course, highlight now is coming to you our startup panel. I am really over the rooftop and over the moon that we have such an amazing lineup of industry pioneers and investors joining us to address the gap between intellectual capital and financial capital. In other words, global talents and global startups and global companies and global investments. And as you see here, joining us today are three amazing leaders who share something in common. Their work and their personal stories are all great inspirations. So I'm going to start with Ihar. As Senaran, he has backed 150 companies started by globally born entrepreneurs, and now especially with Geek Ventures focusing on immigrant entrepreneurs. How do you see the advantage and also challenges of especially foreign born and globally born and international founders as they scale companies? Because I read the data doesn't lie, right? Out of all the U.S. unicorns, 55% are founded by foreign-born immigrant entrepreneurs. Working with them, what are the secrets? By the way, I hear some shout-outs. Everyone that's foreign-born and immigrant or international, yeah, do it hard. Because what makes us different does not make us less. It makes us more. And he has been investing with that brings returns like 100 times the amount to mention Decacorn. So tell me about your own personal story and what, how you evolved from someone with international background, a talent, now into investor.
Yeah, thank you very much for a nice introduction. So I actually moved to the US 12 years ago myself as a software engineer and beginner angel investor at that time. I worked at Google and I went to Google in New York. The thing that I noticed, so I started angel investing around the same time, back in 2011, 2012. And I was exposed to some companies through my network, especially in Europe, where I lived there before that, going to conferences in Europe. And I noticed, obviously, that the best founders were going to the US. And I was going to the US because I feel that that's where the opportunity is. So you mentioned this, talent is distributed globally everywhere, while opportunity is not. The bulk of opportunity is here in the US, right? So I came to the US because I saw this opportunity for myself. And the best founders were coming here. But at the same time, since I came here as an adult, I wasn't studying in any U.S. colleges. I wasn't born here. My network in the U.S. when I just came was very limited, but it was especially focused on people who are in a similar boat with me or people who I knew from before me coming to the U.S. And my first investments were in the people like me. Well, very early, I invested in PandaDoc. Some of you used their product. I invested when there were literally 4 people when they didn't go to the US yet, and they had already had 2 sales or something, right? So I was their first investor, and they were obviously moving to San Francisco. They were obviously selling to US market, and what I found them back in Europe. And after that, I was seeing more and more of these interesting startups. And several years later, I realized, right, so that my deal flow and the startups I see are very different from a typical, person who has network in Silicon Valley. Somebody who went to Stanford, or somebody who is connected to the VCs, or maybe who worked at the VC in Stanford. But that doesn't mean that mine is worse in any way, right? So I ended up backing a lot of very interesting entrepreneurs, and the cool thing there was that after many years of backing these people, I started getting some results. And by 2021, I realized that, okay, it seems it's working for me. And I started Geek Ventures with a very explicit goal of backing immigrant founders coming to the US. So we invest in the US, in American companies, selling to American customers with people who were born elsewhere. right? So, and we look at this from multiple angles. One is, yes, there is a lot of advantage that we can get for our LPs through just filtering on this metric, right? You know that majority of US unicorns were started by immigrant founders. We know that immigrant founders have gone through some struggle by, having to go to US. They have shown some ambition or willing to move to another place. They have shown, some ability to adapt by, learning to live in the new country and getting new network. So that's already a really good filter. And then we see there's also a group of people where we can add value, right? So by actually bringing them network and so on. So to not talk too long. So you asked what are the advantages and difficulties. The big advantage is that we know they know how to go through struggle. They know how to deal with adversity. They also have all these like different culture codes. Somebody who was grown up in California and lived for their whole life there, that's kind of one culture they were around. Somebody who grew up in, Cambodia and came to US and learned US culture, they also have their original culture, which gives them much wider view of the world. And there is a big advantage of the people who are coming here being able to hire abroad, which is almost always cheaper. And you actually have better talent available because employees over there in the country where the entrepreneurs from probably have less choice of great companies to work for compared to people who are here or Silicon Valley. So these are on the good side. On the bad side, on difficulty, it's always about network, right? So it's like the biggest challenge they have is network and some of the skills of pitching, right? So we know that it's a kind of a joke, but it's like pretty much the best country in terms of being able to sell yourself is US. So people who grew up in the US are probably, on average, are much better in selling themselves and in selling in general than people who are born elsewhere. So immigrant entrepreneurs in most cases have this advantage there, and we need to help them with mentor, encourage them to be better in selling and better in raising money. So yeah, all of that is like fundraising and network is what we help and what is important to help.
Thank you so much, Yuval. That's very insightful. And it actually speaks to our heart, right? We live through this. And especially for me, a marketing professor, definitely agree on the selling. Because I think the irony about immigrant founders are the fact that they're actually overperforming, but in the meanwhile, they're invisible and underappreciated. And they have actually a lot of secret sauce, like you said. They have access to global talent pool because of their roots. So there's a disadvantage, but then there's also how we can turn adversity to opportunity and, turn underdogs to superheroes. That's actually what Chris has been doing. I literally witnessed how he single-handedly is pursuing the mission of educating unpaying people in this world, regardless of where they're magnitude, so they can make money doing what they love. In other words, bridging the gap between their talent, their skills, to revenue, and hopefully their journey as investment and have this cycle going on. So Chris, can you also share your personal story and how that inspired you to Chris Bro do more?
I can't even keep my eyes open right now. Is there something in the water?
So what's going on? Oh my gosh, let me check. Please. It's a
It's the fusion power, guys. It's the fusion power, organic, natural.
Okay, and so that I don't bore everybody, where should I focus my answer?
So I would love to hear, first of all, your personal story, because that's really where I got a lot of inspiration, and then how you decided to start Future from your personal journey from a creative to beating global band and winning Emmy, but not only just personal success, but also passing the wisdom to the next generation, which includes myself, in fact, and also my students who have also followed Chris and learned how to, start a side gig, which later turned into a full-time business.
Okay, I'm not an above average student, and I'm not a very good rule follower because my parents wanted me to do certain things I just didn't apply myself in school. I always told myself I wasn't very good at learning compared to my older brother. He went to Stanford and did wonderful things. I'm like, I don't know. But mostly it's because the way that you learn in public schools in California is not very good. I found the classes I was most engaged in were not the typical classes, like wood shop or yearbook. Those are things that I came alive. So the reason why I wound up where I wound up is because I applied to colleges or universities and didn't get accepted into a single one. So I had to go to where no Asian parent wants their kids to go, community college. It's like purgatory for Asian parents. You get stuck in there, you do vocation, you might wind up fixing cars, get your hands dirty, that kind of thing. Well, luckily, that gave me the time to think and find myself, and I wound up going to art school and really find my calling. And for a long time, I searched desperately to find what my identity is. I've had some issues as being an immigrant, as a refugee, not fitting in with a culture, and never feeling like I belonged anywhere. So it was when I found graphic design that I finally found something where I can build an identity around. And so for a long time, I described myself as a graphic designer. Today, I describe myself as an educator. I think I've graduated from that. And that's kind of like what led me down this path.
Yeah, I love it. By the way, when Chris says he's an average student, it just means A for average for Asians. And when you get a B, that's really bad. And that's why you end up with C for community college. But I also love the fact that you mentioned some fun stuff. And speaking of fun stuff, I haven't heard anything more fun than what Hans did. Of course, backing underdogs and, capturing untapped markets. But did you also know he's not only got a hat of a pilot, like a professional trained pilot. I suppose that's what's behind iFly.vc. But do you know he's also the champion of cherry pit spitting competition. In other words, he can shoot cherry pits. And how fun is that? So, Han, can you tell us, of course, also a little bit of your story, but also how you decide to back unsexy companies, unlike chasing, no offense to unicorns, but, a lot of your founders are also immigrant founders and under-tapped markets. I'd love to also hear how your personal story and how that motivates you to develop your investment thesis at iFly.
You bet. Well, thank you, Sonny. Thank you both. And hi, everyone. My name is Han Shen. I'm founding partner of iFly, the venture fund based out here in Austin. I'm also immigrant. I came to the States in 1998. The initial idea was not about getting into VC, but becoming a professor like my dad. So I went to Chicago to get my PhD. You may not guess what the PhD field is about. It was chemistry. So when I watched the TV show Breaking Bad, I thought to myself I could do better in the chemistry lab. But speaking of the story about cherry pit spitting, it's a real story. It's actually international cherry pit spitting competition.
Global.
Exactly. So I was dragged by my friends to a farm in Michigan called Tree Mandas. And they hold this international cherry pit spitting every summer. The idea is very simple. You take this, cherry, you eat the pulp, you stand, you cannot jump, and spit as fast as you can. And that year, miraculously, I got number one. And it was a surprise because initially I signed up when I saw the sign saying, you sign up, you get free lunch. As a very poor graduate student, of course, I signed up with no second thought. But the bigger surprise was about winning. And I suddenly became a local celebrity. There was newspaper interviewing me. I told them, why I signed up. Of course, they never published that part of the story. But there was a lady standing next to us. When she heard the story, she said, oh, you never know until you try. I'm like, yes, that's right. So that's my punchline later on through my job interview, getting started with a VC. So for any immigrant leaving home country to a new world, there's a lot of uncertainty. Right? It takes audacity, bravery, and some kind of perseverance to go through the hardship to start something, to build something. So that's why I'm glad, Sonny, you brought up this story about the cherry pit spitting. Doesn't matter whether I win or lose, but the tagline is something I remember I want to share. But in case you do want to know how far I sped during that competition, I think it was over 41 feet or something. So let's find a cherry later on during happy hour. Give it a try.
Where does that skill come from? No idea. Come on, that's the real story.
Well, if you asked me, I thought at the moment, I just remember high school physics teacher said, to get the furthest horizontal distance, you want to shoot for like a 45 degrees, right? Roughly like that. So that's about execution more than just idea. But long story short, on to venture, I moved to Silicon Valley from the East Coast in 2009 to get into VC. And I used to think Silicon Valley was the center of the universe, period. But until I start seeing startups and founders pop up everywhere with different backgrounds. For the first 7 years, I worked for established funds. During these years, one of my best investments was Oculus, was acquired by Facebook. Everybody was very happy. But 2016, when I started my own, iFly, that's a fun Bible. You are doing right. I am a solo GP. I carry pilot license. That's why it's called iFly rather than we fly until we have a second GP at some point. But what I decided to narrow it down to anything that makes American consumers happy. And the market is huge, but the consumer market in the United States is not static. It's changing, it's evolving, it's also enabled by new tech stack all the time. So when you combine both the consumer insights and tech enablement, I see a lot of exciting companies and startup founders. That's why we double down in this space. Just to give one example, the best performing company in Fund 1 is called We, which is spelled as EEE. I know some of you are probably already customers. They are the biggest online grocery for ethnic minorities in the United States, which is very, very big market, but super underserved. When we invested, Instacart was actually really huge. So in We's case, they did not work with brick-and-mortar stores. Instead, they built the first party, fully vertically integrated e-commerce platform. And also the founder was an immigrant who had a lot of insights in the tech stack to execute. So at the end of the deliver for free, they still make very decent margin. But 6 years ago, they got turned down by all the other investors. And we'll get into that probably later this time. But at iFlower, we followed conviction. We're happy to lead, we're okay to follow, but we have so much conviction in what the entrepreneur sees and wants to do, and we see how we are able to add value. In that particular round, we just became the only investor of the company. And later on, as we introduced capital, as we brought talent, helped them get to the next level, the last one valuation was $4 billion when we're, say, the second largest shareholder on the company. But in some way, I think the benefit and the competitive advantage of immigrant, also people with different international backgrounds, can we turn that into the advantage in the way that, first of all, it's about the knowledge base? Because in that part of the world, the hard part and the fun part of investing is seeking and seizing the non-obviousness ahead of others. If we have a consensus that NVIDIA stock is hot, if you all love the Tesla stock, that's the price you pay for. You might be able to get a very expensive logo on the website. You don't necessarily get good return. But when we have the non-consensus early on and still make the right bet for both entrepreneurs and investors, that's where you have a potential to hit home run. So that's why I'm an advocate to turn our background into an advantage in what we were doing and we were investing. Again, thank you, Sonic.
Thank you. In fact, I think you can see here the PhD behind has cherry-picked spitten, but also his investment thesis backed by a lot of market insights, because there's a lot of invisible opportunities that have been overlooked. For example, immigrant, you also invested in addition to, other ethnic grocery, but also immigrant finance, fintech, for example. Essentially, my parents are using Yuyi and they don't use HEB, because it's an interface that they feel comfortable with. So it's very much untapped. But I also love the fact that you mentioned learning about the marketplace for founders, of course, for investors. And I in fact, I need to quote here from some of the events we did previously, because I remember Han mentioned the reason he's doing venture investing is also he's learning himself along at his portfolio company. And that's really where I believe what this defines us. We are here in this world to learn. And going back to what Ihai mentioned, from learning to Murdoch, I wanted to really, go through this whole process to 4 cabinets. In fact, we believe that we start with the intellectual capital, right? We learn, we have ideas, we have strategy, and then you gather the people to execute. So we have human capital, we have the talent, just like what Kusa has been working on the 1 billion minus 1 will press a lot. And then social network is so important because when you are connected, that's when you get to number 4, the financial capital. So that's really where I see how intellectual capital goes to, intellectual capital goes through human capital, social capital, and eventually financial capital. And going back to this topic, Ihar, because you mentioned when we were discussing what are the challenges, network is really the biggest challenge because talent is everywhere, capital is not everywhere, and they're not so-called insiders. They're not in the club of investors because they didn't grow up with families, or a silver spoon. And when it came to the world, not to mention leaving their friends and family behind. So I'd love to hear your insight on that, Ihar, in terms of, what are the families you see who's able to tackle the social network kind of challenge when they not only go to market, right? Because you need to reach your customers, build relationship, build business development, but also reaching out to investors that they're not connected with.
So the way we educate and communicate some tips and tricks on this, right? There are several levels. First, think a little bit more out of the box about your existing social network and try to tap some of it, even if it's like not traditional, right? So for example, many people who you actually know can turn into angel investors for you, even if you don't think that way, right? I remember back when I worked at Google, smart entrepreneurs actually reached out to me asking for money, even though I wasn't presenting as an investor, right? So because like, oh, this guy works at Google, probably he has money. And that's actually smart, that works, right? So, and one thing that I always recommend all entrepreneurs, the easiest way to close is to people who know you. Maybe you'll close not much. Maybe it will be 10K. Maybe it will be 20K, right? They will not have millions maybe unless, you have really nice, rich network, right? But it still will be very useful, right? So that's one. Second is realize that when you go to people who you're just meeting, you will have much lower close rate than than other competitors of yours who are going to people they know, right? So, and one of the angles I say there, don't be greedy on terms and don't over pivot or over focus on what other people raise, right? So the biggest mistake I've seen people with small networks do is try to aim at like raising the same round they've seen on TechCrunch. Oh, a company that's doing similar things to me raised 3 million on 30 million valuation, I'm going to do the same. No, they're not, because the difference is that they knew their investors for 5-10 years and you don't, right? So you're going to investors who don't know you that much. So you will need to reach for less at the beginning. So you will need to be able to be ready to talk to more investors. Your round process will be longer. Instead of speaking a month and 10 conversations, it will take a year and 200 conversations. And the evaluation will be lower than of somebody with a bigger network. It doesn't mean the startup is worse, but the network is the biggest thing that defines your evaluation, and you need to know and be okay with that. Also, try to find people on the investor side who can relate with and who can relate with you. And one of the things that a lot of founders don't understand is that when you're starting your first startup and you are kind of like, not really sure how to do it, there are actually a lot of VCs who are in similar boat with you, who are just starting their VC and they're not sure what they're doing as well. So there are a lot of this VC, hundreds, thousands of VCs that are small, that are dealing with raising their first $3, $4, $5 million fund, and they're going to invest 50K checks. And if they can relate to you, you can relate to them. And it's often a small check with a lot of value because they are also trying to establish themselves, right? They need a track record. If you can convince them that you will be their champion and you will be their win, they will help you beyond the money. So think about this, and often for founders with low networks, the best bet is with small VCs. Don't waste time on Sequoias or Lightspeed or other funds that have amazing recognition. go with these smaller VCs, you have much smaller recognition. And I understand you still need to win competition within that VC's deal flow, but there is a better chance. Don't be greedy on valuation. Take as many people or funds as you can in your round and iterate from there. And ask everybody who invested for introductions. It's easy for people to invest and kind of not do much. And people are often, like small investors, are actually careful is like not to overdo their introductions for you, or you're very healthy because they don't know how much you want. Ask them, right? My best portfolio founders were those who kept asking me and other investors for introductions, because after all, warm intro, it has a much higher chance to convert.
Yeah, these are amazing behind-the-scene advice because you don't see. I mean, that's really the common misconception when we hear startup stories in media. It's those that already made it. We don't really get to hear the beginning stage, and to your point, also the early funds, like early, emerging managers. So we're all learning this together. So back to the topic of learning, Han, because you're pretty hands-on in terms of your startup, just like what you mentioned, ER, in terms of warm introduction. How do you see mentorship, especially when it comes to immigrant founders, when they need maybe guidance and, you might have existing network, let's say in Silicon Valley. How do you see the word of mentorship in their learning and also in their network expansion?
So I think the word hands-on could mean different things to different investors and founders. To us at iFly, one of the attributes for the term hands-on is actually about our availability, right? We cannot do everything for the founders. They are in the driver's seat. They should do it. But availability of the investor is also critical if they have something urgent to discuss, if they have a bad day. And our portfolio is very concentrated. On average, we invest in about 2 to 4 companies a year. So it's a size of the portfolio as a solo GP with a small team who are very good at handling these kind of crisis moments. So our notion is if someone calls us at midnight, I'll be more than happy and motivated to take that call because, again, the concentration and our availability as part of the hands-on kind of a notion. But we didn't want to be in the driver's seat. We cannot replace founders. And I had my success and failure in my 16 years of venture investing career. What I found in common is none of the investment failure happened because we picked the wrong industry or the founders became lazy. It just never happened. But usually, it's when a founder reached the glass ceiling in terms of leadership, strategic thinking, and so on and so forth, right? So our job became, how can we help these founders break the glass ceiling? But when you have limited resource, capital, should you go after 25 cities all at once, or should you go deep into one single city and figure out the unit economics first? Depending on the context, the correct answer could vary a lot year over year. And actually, one thing I also wanted to add to Ihal's comment in terms of networking, expansion, dealing with investors, a lot of our support is also on the emotional side. That's the other under-discussed attribute of running a startup. As much as we're looking to investment as potential transaction, but I hate the word deal. It sounds like it's just very transactional. Well, if this deal doesn't happen, is that the end of the day? We want to have that. So in our experience, even if we don't invest, we try to provide some thoughts or make the right introduction to leave a karma behind. Who knows what's going to turn into? But in reality, when you are in this industry long enough, doing enough good deeds, good things do happen both ways. Still remember 2015, I turned down a founding Palo Alto as I was, leaving the previous firm to start iFly the next year. But definitely did something right. And later on, 4 years later, the same founder who had turned down introduced a family office to me that became an LP of my fund too, right? So dealing with no out of a short-term transaction discussion versus building a relationship for the long term. And in fact, this week, we are going to publish a newsletter. Basically, my personal journey of getting rejected by LPs more than 500 times.
Like founders, right?
Exactly. I'm the founder in the first place, right? You might get 20 rejections by VCs to get your term sheet to raise the first $2 million. But getting rejected by 500 more than 500 LPs and actually stopped counting. So I'm going to share some of those lessons with our founders and with any of you who are interested as well.
No, thank you for sharing all that because, you actually echo what Ihar mentioned earlier because believe it or not, the fund managers are also learning and they're experiencing similar challenges, especially where we're immigrant investors and immigrant entrepreneurs we're all raising. And also, I love the fact that you mentioned when the companies are growing, and this is what I personally feel, the company has its own spirit and its own soul and its own speed. If the founder is not growing himself or herself at the same speed, we hit that ceiling because the company is going really well, and you're not growing together, and that's really coming back to Chris. I'm saying you at the end because that's what you're doing about sharing your wisdom of helping entrepreneurs really turn their talents and skill set, but skill and expand. For example, one thing, and this is where I remember back when I got my tenure. And also, to our tenured professor, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? That's it? And then I remember starting our venture studio. Back then it's called ZDAT, now it's rebranded as Brand Global. And then this is when some of the comments, Chris, really hit me. Like, for example, your journey turning from a talent to a master educator, it's not just the hours of work you put. It is the value you bring. Well, I think that is really fundamental in terms of pricing, strategy, and business expansion. But I want to come back to you, Chris, because at Feature, which I would call a private business group about the price tag, it's extremely affordable, but you are really learning practical skills. I tell all my students to take Chris class, but how do you also build this global community? Because as a longtime follower, I see talent joining you from Cambodia, Vietnam, and honestly, that's actually what motivated us to start Truly. By the way, today we're here in person. We also have entrepreneurs joining us from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, all over the world, because we're trying to make it more accessible. And coming back to Chris' mission about educating a billion people, I don't see you just passing your information or your knowledge. I also see you cultivating this global community of talents. So what is your observation in terms of learning, also community building as we bring together the startup ecosystem?
I represent an education panel in the Philippines. And I remember one educator saying this, that it's not fair, we cannot compete against movies and video games. And I wholeheartedly disagree with what she said. I said the minute that we resign ourselves to saying we can't compete with popular entertainment is the minute we give up on the kids. So I said we should put the same kind of resources that Hollywood and game studios put into developing educational content as they do into the games that they make. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars for the chance of breaking even or potentially making profit. Why is it then that in the educational sector, it's stale, there's not a lot of investment or a lot of innovation? I'm not saying I have the answer, but we'll have to try to provide an alternative to what exists today. Now, I'm very fortunate I was able to go to art school at a time in which, at that time, was still very expensive, but today it's staggering. To go to the same school that I went to, I think it's $24,000 a semester. And if you're a foreign-born person, it means you do not qualify for financial aid, and that's money out of your pocket. So when they graduate school, $250,000 in debt, what jobs are waiting for them? How long do they have to work before they can be paid that off? And that really did not sit well with me. I taught at the same private school for 15 years, and eventually I thought, wait, I'm upon the problem right now. I'm teaching, I'm trying to do the best that I can so that kids can go into debt. And that's the reality. So there must be a better way. And so I thought, okay, why don't I take the same kinds of things I'm doing in class, broadcast it for free for a global audience using public available platforms like YouTube and see what happens. And today I'm really thrilled because almost everywhere I go, if they have an internet connection and they're in the creative business space, they have been touched by a piece of content that we made that's helped them better their lives and the lives of the people they care about. And that's what really fuels me.
But I also see you building this global learning community because you're your students are also connected. In fact, there's a student of yours who was going to come with me from Houston, and I'm seeing all their students also supporting each other when it comes to like almost like transforming themselves from creators to entrepreneurs, because it's really the process. To your point, learning is not putting your life on hold. In fact, you can actually be creating and sharing and monetize what you learn. And that's really where I see the secret of bridging the gap between talent, where you're just working, versus you're actually creating value and building a business and investing. In fact, I didn't see this as a linear process. I can see this as parallel process. So I guess my closing round of question for each of you is, what do you see the upcoming trend, and what is your advice for everybody that's here who's echoing and resonating with everything you guys are sharing? And also, I also have an asking, because don't you guys feel like this is really valuable, this session, like I'm taking so much wisdom? We also want to figure out how we can support cheer. So I would say this round would be share and ask. Share your insights about where English is going, your advice for founders, but also how can we support you?
So I'm always a little bit careful about talking about trends to founders, because the trends come from founders, right? So the best founders tell me what they believe is coming through their company, what are the problems that they're trying to solve. But in short, the few trends that are like kind of widely applicable is, of course, AI is coming, meaning that the best companies will have fewer people, but there's people at the higher level, right? You learn how to automate, how to hire fewer people, and that doesn't mean don't hire, means to hire only the best. You don't try to direct 100 people, try 5 or 10 people. That's very important. Also, you probably need less money from investors, and be careful to not over raise, and at the same time, try to be as self-sufficient as possible. My approach is that the companies that raise the most are actually companies who need the least money. So the moment you figure out early how you can have low burn and actually survive on the revenue you get from the customers, it makes it much easier for you to raise. And then when you raise, of course, know how to spend it smartly on growth and do ready for the next raise, not by spending too much, but by actually being self-sufficient. So these are a few things. And of course, keep looking at the global market for your product, right? So of course, we invest in companies that sell to US consumers or US businesses, but think about how a product can be used everywhere. Yeah.
Yes, Kus, did you make an ask?
Oh, yes, you asked. Okay, all right. How can we support you? Because you've been so generous in terms of sharing your insights.
How you can help. So first of all, we always are interested in seeing the great companies. Similar to you guys, we are not doing about 2 companies per year. They're about 10 companies per year, which means that about 99.5% of the companies we see, we do not invest, but we still want to see more great companies. Send them to us. Come to our events. We had one Austin event 2 days ago, but you probably will do another Austin event next year. We'll do events in New York, where I'm based. Yeah, so, and of course, if you know somebody with money, you can invest with me too. So, yeah, thank you.
What? All this helps.
All this calls.
Okay, so I just want to share an observation. Of course, you know what I'm talking about, which is we're moving in a time of really rapid change. Things are changing faster than they've ever been, and simultaneously, it will be the slowest it's ever been. And so what I was thinking is we all need to be really agile in our mind, agile in how we learn. The systems that were created 10, 100, or 1,000 years ago that we're still using. And so I would just ask you to question some of those things every once in a while to see if there's a better, smarter, more efficient way to do things. Now, my wife and I, we did something more responsible, I think, as parents. We put our money away for our children for college tuition. And so by the time they're in school, which they're in school now, we'll have this money for them. And I've been trying to buy both of my children to drop out of college because I didn't believe that's what the answer is anymore. Maybe it's never been, but especially in this time. So that piece of paper, the degree, PhD, may not mean as much as it like the PhD in chemistry.
He's a victim of PhD.
I don't use those words, but
he's a classic Asian overachiever, PhD in chemistry, flies planes, right? And champion cherry spitting die. Like, are you also in ABCA? Almost. Serious? It's like trifecta over there. Asians, I think, made Asians like us look bad. Right? But the thing I would ask is if you've been transformed or touched by a piece of content, just to share it with somebody. Share it with 2 or 3 people, and that would mean the world to me.
Thank you so much, Chris. By the way, PhD also stands for permanent hemisphere damage. That's right. So, Gus? See, that's the damage talk.
We're grateful for standing for this panel. So whenever you talk about trend, right? Whenever you talk about anything buzzy, whenever media catch the attention, I always encourage people, myself included, to ask one question: what's in it for me, or what's in it for us? What's in it for our company? It doesn't mean we don't want to stay curious, to learn, but the context, how we are able to embrace the ongoing trend, is also a very important part of the equation. So talk about AI or any other tech's rising trend in the past 15 plus years. Either you are very good at building a tech tools and sell them as a SaaS product to other businesses. Or how about the notion of tech-savvy entrepreneurship? You don't have to be good at writing every single line of source code, but if you know how to assess a tool off the shelf for your established business to grow even further, or occasionally, if you do have tech in-house or offshore to help you build the last couple of lines of source code to solve the specific problem to drive the efficiency of the operation. Just also think about that. It say happen, we love the consumer economy in the United States so much. We also invested in a bubble tea chain called Yumi Tea on the West Coast. We got 2 locations in LA. Check it out. I'm always a shameless promoter of our portfolio companies. But after seeing more than 25 bubble tea brands, one thing that's significant about this company is because of their tech background and the DNA in problem solving, they have achieved far better efficiency, which results in really strong operating margin. Every $100 of revenue they earned, they spend only 30 cents on marketing. Right? That's just a number to keep in mind to think about how the tech is actually able to help them make such a big impact on running their own business. And my ask is actually related to the investment thesis. Also, what I'm excited about is, again, the consumer economy in the country is booming, it's evolving, it's changing. One of the key drivers is the Gen Z seeing all the cross-culturally inspired opportunities. Now, bubble tea is one such example. 15 years ago, when I saw the first bubble tea in downtown Mountain View, California, it was a whole bunch of Chinese kids in the line. But nowadays, you go to any bubble tea shop, but because of the taste, the excitement, the Instagrammability that's amplified over social media, people of any background, of any kind of a skin color, actually fell in love into bubble tea. Right? So that drives the change of the trend. And similarly, matcha flavored beverage is every Starbucks store trying to with dumpling. Just to name a few examples, of course, the K-drama, K-pop, right? You see this cross-cultural influence into the main street of the United States. So as an investor, and also given our cultural and ethnic background, we want to turn that into a partnership with a startup in the U.S., but from outside the country, but wanted to get into the United States to do something together and have fun. Thank you.
Next time I have a meeting, I have to bring Beba to the front room, right?
But next time, that is on me.
We still have a few minutes. I wonder if anybody have questions about us. Yes? And, okay.
Is that?
Question before?
Questions. Do they use your PhD in chemistry to improve the bubble tea to each year and last longer?
It's a secret formula.
Of course.
Well, my name is Marco Boredo. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. But this, also as a founder and a small business owner, I was faced with the challenge of someone who I trusted. It went through all the screening credentials, proven credentials, and defrauded the startup with 9 Bitcoins. And so Go back to NPR's Experience National Public Radio. We're looking for an AI specialist. I ended up hiring a hacker from North Korea. And so, what was your experience and when? Because I'm sure you have met or you've been introduced to a bad element, and probably your screen. But then, how did you deal with that situation?
So basically, if I understand the question is like, how do we deal with frauds among startup founders, right? So anyone who's started, I actually just, there are some frauds on LP side and some frauds on founder side. And of course, I've seen my share of LPs who promise that they will invest and they don't invest. And thankfully, it's mostly like we waste time, but it's like really not a big danger. There is definitely frauds on startup side, and those we can lose money potentially if we invest and then something happens. I personally was never involved in a deal with a fraud, and I think the closest was there was one company where I was an angel investor through a syndicate for a small check that was sued by their investor because the CEO was spending the company money. But in general, when we do due diligence, the big part is integrity. For us, integrity is absolutely necessary, and we need to look for signals. You do a lot of reference checking. Oh, that was loud. We do a lot of reference checking. We actually had one company where we spent like 2 months on due diligence, really went deep, and the later reference checks shown to us that all of the previous investors of this founder are extremely unhappy with them, and that the founder was significantly non-transparent, and the investors felt that he was like anti-investor. So we ended up pulling that and not investing in that company. On the end, we approach it carefully. Is like, but yes, we need to do a lot of different the reference checks to check that there is no real threat. But at the end, we invest in a portfolio, and there is a risk because just legally that if one of our companies becomes a fraud, it will not destroy our fund. Of course, we will deal with FBI and others if necessary. Want to add anything?
So I guess the question for you or anybody is always, do you have to do it? Right. So a lot of people are pressed into a accelerated decision-making process, and also pushed by the mindset of fear of missing out. So as an investor, internally we always ask two fundamental questions, which have to be also supported by a ton of evidence. The first one is, why are we excited about this one? Right, that's the obvious one to ask. The second question is, why do we deserve to be on this company's cap table by taking meaningful amount of ownership? And often the first part might be easier to address. We'd love the opportunity, so do a bunch of other investors. But the second part is, I have to assume this company has been seen or checked by a lot of other investors. What is a piece of insight do we get to see that is not obvious to others? Right? What are something we can do to make such a dent on the cap table that other investors cannot? Right? If I have a doubt about the second part of the equation, then I will also question, why us as an investor? Do we miss something that we don't see? With that, it actually refers us to take a paced process, not only looking at all the data, talking to the people, and also more importantly is to digest the information we get to see. Now, often I would argue the same business plan or same founders presented themselves in front of all of us, three of us, we might come up with very opposite decision or conclusion. It's because we have different theses, we have different views about personality, which is fine. But you just have to have these fundamental elements in your decision-making process. And beyond fraud, you can have many mistakes you make over time, but sometimes it's poor luck, but sometimes it's also time to refine the framework in analyzing the opportunity in general to make yourself a better investor or operator.
Yeah, if I may also, conclude, because thank you. So highlighting a few takeaway for everybody. Of course, as immigrant founders and investors, we have our adversities, but we also can turn them into advantages. Like we're resilient, we're resourceful, we're frugal. We bring 10 times value with 1/10 of the cost, right? And when things, like this happen, that's what goes back to the power of community and the power of network. If you cross your check and validate with others in your network, that can also help to check on integrity of people you're dealing with. That's the reason, even at our e-learning platform, it's not just sharing knowledge, but also building connections and learning in our community. And we hope this conversation continues. We're just getting started. We encourage everybody to join Brand Global Community and also follow all of our amazing panelists and follow their companies, see what's coming up. Remember the asking, okay? Bring the great founders and investors to UR, share a piece of content with Chris, and also get a boba tea from Umi to Sabir Han. So again, a round of applause for all of our speakers. I'd also like to thank our partners, of course, thanks to Lucas, thanks to Elia, thanks to Live, Sales, US, and Geek Venture, and thanks to Jonathan with Chris, and thanks to you, Andrew and Troy, and all of the amazing people. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this. Thank you.